Welcome to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspective Podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we have a very special guest, and I would say one of the best topics that we've had in a long time. Brian Gilman is on. And now, Brian, you're the Chief Marketing Officer at ThetaRay. You actually started out in economics, which I think is fantastic. And we'll see that as you talk today and how you think about things. You've worked in the telecom industry for years. You also, interesting enough, you and I share this, both have adopted kids internationally, domestically. You've adopted out of the foster care. I think it just talks tremendously to your heart and how you can look so calm when you have 9 kids in your household.
Work stress doesn't really mean that much to me when I have to come home and deal with kids in volumes.
I love understanding that background. We're going to talk today about turning B2B's biggest challenges into competitive wins. But before we dive into that, I would love to have you maybe just expand a little bit more on your background before we get started.
Sure. As you said, I'm currently CMO for a company called ThetaRay. We are an AI-powered financial crime compliance platform. So think of your traditional AML platforms that have served the needs of banks and fintechs for years. We lever our own homegrown developed AI platform to help evolve that market forward in a way that hasn't been seen in a long time in terms of legacy rules-based systems. Prior to that, as you mentioned, I've been in the marketing leadership positions of many different businesses spanning AI, telecom. My career has been an interesting one. I'm not a traditional marketer. As you said, I was an economics major, started my career in investment banking and mergers and acquisitions. So I have a bit of a different style, a bit of a different approach and mindset when it comes to sales and marketing.
Part of what I really appreciate about the way that you approach this is that you, from an M&A kind of a background, you look at the marketing function, you look at the executive, a C-suite seat in that function in terms of how it develops value, not only for the customers, but as the business, right? And at exit in mergers and acquisitions. And so as marketers, we need to understand a lot more about the economics of the businesses that we're helping to manage and grow. So I'm going to get right in and I'm going to ask you something that I think is one of the biggest issues that we face in the B2B world, especially in an ABM model where it takes months and months and months to work on and close rather large deals. And it's called the trust epidemic. And I'm going to cite a stat or two, like out of the most recent LinkedIn Edelman Trust Barometer, where they looked at over 32,000 respondents worldwide. And one of the most telling facts that came out of that was that they believe, 61% of those respondents believe that as business leaders, we are being intentionally misleading. Intentionally. A totally different study showed that for the B2B buyer, 74% don't believe the customer evidence that we present to them. And we wonder why there's this self-service buyer journey that's going on where they're waiting longer and longer and longer to want to even talk to us. Here's my question. What does that mean to you as a chief marketing officer?
One, I understand the data behind that. I think the number is a tad misleading. I don't think that companies are necessarily intentionally misleading customers. What do I mean by that? We're at the beginning of a massive technology evolution, revolution, depending on what you want to call it, with AI. AI, in my opinion, has been one of the greatest advances that I've seen in my career in technology, along with the internet, the mobile phone. It's in those lines of like big technology evolutions. That's been great for business in terms of advancement, in terms of knowledge, in terms of all the things that we know and love about AI. But as a sales and marketing executive, it's been this great equalizer as well. What do I mean by that? It has allowed for companies to spin up very quickly, sometimes overnight. I wake up every morning and someone lobs me over a new logo that says, hey, these guys look and smell an awful lot like us. And it's not factually inaccurate because a lot of the capabilities that AI has allows for quick advancements and things, but it also allows for, as you and I discussed in our prep calls, a lot of bullshit bingo where you can spin up a company very quickly. And they can say the same things, and it may be nothing more than an LLM license with a visual design tool that can claim to build out virtual assistants overnight. there's no technology behind it. There may not even be a customer base behind it. And so while it is factually accurate, some of the things that they can offer to the market, it is misleading because there's levels to the game. You know what I'm saying? There are companies that have homegrown builds AI. ThetaRay, we built our own AI stack from scratch over years and years and years of development. We have data scientists. We have our own algorithm, which makes what we have very unique in the marketplace. We have a lot of these startups that claim the same things. And so it's not intentionally misleading, but it is misleading by default. And I do think that it's made marketing very, very difficult. And it has led to a culture of not trusting a lot of what's out in the market.
That's something that, like, our brands are supposed to be trust marks, right? That's kind of like a marketing 101. B2B is a relationship-based business. And you talked about the fact that we have more ways to understand our customers. So therefore, more ways to position ourselves correctly to these customers. Digital signals, right? Intent signals. We have more data than we've ever had before. But you said something to me that was really interesting. You said we have to get our feet on the street more. We have to go out and we have to have face-to-face conversations with our target audience. Tell me your philosophy, your thinking behind that.
It's been an evolution. In the companies I've been in PLG-led motions in terms of our business go-to-market. My most recent 2 leadership positions, very high cost ARR types of deals. When you're implementing a financial crime compliance platform, that's not something that is like, light up your seat license for $19 a month. It's a much different buyer exercise and buyer journey. And as a result, I find that the marketing waterfall needs to break a little bit, because when you're selling high priced platforms to buyers, you're generally dealing with a different type of buyer persona. I could be a director, in a marketing organization and asked to light up some MarTech platform that, I did my own research on, and it's going to cost us a couple $100 a year. I'll sign off on it tomorrow. It can help us be faster, better, more efficient. Sure, we'll pick a flyer on it. Usually there's a 30-day out on that contract. No harm, no foul if it doesn't work. Getting back to the trust. Sometimes at a lower price point, trust isn't even all that important. If it says it can do something, I'll take a flyer on it if there's an easy out and it's not going to cost me a lot. But when we're talking about regulated industries, we're talking about, it doesn't even need to be regulated industries, but higher ticket price solutions, things that are going to take long time to implement, potentially a high level of customization. I need to be able to get in front of that customer as fast as humanly possible. Why? We said earlier, we were just talking about the lack of trust, and it's because I'm getting bombarded daily. I'm a C-suite buyer as much as anyone else is. The platforms I buy aren't necessarily, several $100,000, but I am constantly my phone rings nonstop. I have spam blockers on my phone. They still get through. They look like local numbers. I pick it up. Hi, I'm so-and-so from such and such agency. And I'm like, oh, foiled again. This happens all day long. Email, text messaging. And at the end of the day, I shut off to that as a C-suite because I don't have the time in my day. And I know that most of these companies, they don't do what they say they can do. And when I know I'm getting bombarded by these things all day, I'm not doing the same level of research if I'm a C-suite officer. So my target buyer at ThetaRay is chief risk officer, chief compliance officer. They're not doing Google searches. They're not doing research in the way that a traditional marketer or a person in R&D who's looking for some product management platform is. I may have one shot at getting an introduction into that customer. So the typical buyer's journey of doing a whole bunch of research and doing, it used to be, I forget the research firm that said that most buyers will do 8 to 13 or 8 to 11 different touch points with the business before ever wanting to engage with them. In my world, that's no longer the case, because if I'm dealing with a C-suite, I got to get to that meeting immediately, because I know if I can get a meeting with that customer to do a demo, to talk technically about my product and why it's different than the rest of the BS bingo that we just discussed, I know that my success rates and my close rates will increase dramatically.
And it's because you've got that one-on-one time. There was a component to that, getting out and targeting and having the one-on-one conversations. There was a learning component. And I want to frame it a little bit because we did this study and we talked to over 50 different B2B C-suite executives and asked them what their 2 greatest challenges to creating long-term sustainable growth were. And the second, we'll talk about number 1 in just a minute, but the second was a lack of deep understanding of the customer's voice. And so when you talked about getting out and feet on the street, face to face with the customer, there was a massive learning component that helped the entire buyer's journey from there. If you could explain that a little bit.
It's interesting because one of the things we didn't just discuss before when we talked about the evolution of AI, I think something else has really laid an additional level of challenge when it comes to market positioning for a company. It's been this ease of use. AI is part of it, but it's even before AI. It was the introduction of the cloud and SaaS, where the buyer's journey before that, earlier on in my career, when it was hardware and software, which was custom coded a little, there was more unique features. Product. My background as a marketer, early days was in product marketing, and product marketing early days was a very critical component of any marketing organization. I would argue product marketing has evolved, and I don't want to say that it's less important, but I think the function has changed. It's less around the technology. If I'm a hardware provider, I have to market this. I don't have another phone with me, but the specs of this and this look very different, and I would market them differently. It's speeds and feeds and bits and bytes, and it's, video clarity, camera pixelation, all of those things that I'm marketing to a customer. The cloud, SaaS, has changed that because it's made the development of the platform less important because implementation is via the cloud. It's a lot easier. It's more, customization of product is significantly easier in the cloud than it was, when you were traditionally buying an off-the-shelf software product. And so this is why it's incredibly important to get in front of that customer, not only to understand, and this gets a bit to discovery, because we need to understand what are the challenges that the customer is trying to overcome, because that is going to be more important than any individual capability that I'm going to claim on mine, which, circling right back 360, comes right back to probably the same specs, the same checklist that most of my other competitors are going to have. What is a business challenge? What is the value that my product brings? And what is the output that we expect to have delivered to them? And I don't think that we as leaders within businesses are doing enough discovery to understand more about the business that they're operating. What are the challenges that business is facing? And how can my product solve that need better, faster, more efficiently than my competitor?
You bring up a really, really good point there. And I like the way you said that, is that it's not like product marketing isn't important because it has a very specific role within the buyer's journey. But getting in front of these customers and having that face to face doesn't happen these days with product marketing. It happens because you have something of value to offer to them, and you are seen as an expert in the industry. You're in the middle of the conversation. You know their challenges. You're talking to them about, I always think about it this way. Vendors talk about the challenges that they solve directly, and they're really important, but they might be this much of this set of challenges that the persona that you're reaching out to has. They need to know that you get this and that you're helping them solve this. So vendors talk here, partners talk here. And so McKinsey said it in the study. They said only 15% of B2B companies actually activate the voice of the customer. Yet in this world of this trust crisis that we're in, the customer's voice actually means more than ours. We had a 3-time B2B CMO on, and she said, Steve, the campaigns, the enablement materials, everything that we do, when the voice of the customer precedes ours, works better. And so I would love to just understand a little bit more from your side on how do we activate the voice of the customer? How do we get the voice of the customer, and how do we execute on the voice of the customer more as B2B organizations?
I think it's better discovery. Marketing can bring people in the door, but at the end of the day, once we get to that meeting, it can't be, here's my product. How can we shoehorn it into your platform? It's, here's your problems that you're dealing with. And so I'm going to give an example. It was a seminal moment in my career. This is when I was back in the video conferencing industry. Video conferencing prior to Zoom and Riverside and all these great SaaS-based platforms, when we talk about the great equalizers, were room-based systems, cameras, codecs in a room, and you had to have one piece of hardware to connect to another piece of hardware. It was, at the time, a very technology-driven sale. CEO X comes in and says, I want to buy video conferencing so that I don't have to travel from New York to San Francisco to Hong Kong. Awesome. Here's why ours is better than theirs. We can do 1080p 60 versus 720p 30, the frame rates and whatnot, and it'll be TV quality. CEO X goes and buys his 3 units. He doesn't travel from site to site to site. Notoriously, the vendor comes back. We go into our sales pitch 6 months later. What else can we sell you? Nothing. Why? Did not work. No, it was great. It's like being on television. Well, then why can't we sell you anything else? I'm not traveling anymore, but the system sits dormant the rest of the 95% of my time when I'm not on calls with San Francisco and Hong Kong. This gets to discovery. And so at the time, as I said earlier, there was 2 primary companies in the video conferencing space. I won't name names, but most people who know the industry know the 2 companies. We were locked in a war with an incumbent vendor. And the incumbent vendor, the company I was at would do really, really well selling into an enterprise. And many times the CEO of our competitive company, who was much larger than us, would take the customer out and a lot of times would give away the video conferencing systems to get the business. Why do they give away the video conferencing systems? That doesn't make any sense. Well, this vendor was really strong in networking hardware. They didn't care about the video conferencing endpoints. They cared about the bandwidth that the video calls brought to the network, which meant $100,000 in video conferencing sales would bring several $100,000 in networking equipment, which makes them stickier than the video conferencing would otherwise. So how did we change the narrative? We brought in a team of experts who came from industry. I said earlier, my background, I came from banking, I understood finance, was to come in and have a different conversation with customers. And it was to not only sell the intended need of what the customer was coming for, but the unintended need that they may not have known. Allow me to go in as an industry expert. I don't carry a bag. I don't have a sales number over my head. Let me talk to your head of HR about how they retain and how they recruit employees. Let me talk to your head of R&D who may be outsourcing some of their development overseas about how we can improve development cycles. What you've done is you've taken an intended need, which the use case is only to 5% of the day, and you're now talking about mass adoption of video, about how video can impact your overall business. It can help drive cost out of your business, how it can improve revenue of your business. It can reduce time to market for products that you're developing. What we found was once we got under the hood of a car and we started talking to customers and we started doing research and we would go in and we would tear through annual reports. We would look at the risk factors in their 10K, which is where companies will try to avoid class action lawsuits later if their numbers don't look good. To say, well, we told you there was a potential problem there. Those are all problems that we should be looking at because that's where the inherent risk in the business sits. And if your solution can help impact those inherent risks in the business, you provide significantly more value. We started walking out our competitor out of a lot of these deals because they were hung up on driving a bandwidth deal. And we now started saying, yeah, you could spend $100,000 over here, but that same $100,000 can now impact your business by 5x. It's a much different conversation and leads to true value, which is a much different sales proposition to any customer who's looking to any vendor.
And you had to have the point of view where I'm going to get in, I'm going to understand the business of my customers and their true challenges beyond the video, the bandwidth connections, right? Your competitors were left in that world. You were looking at this. You were looking at the greater challenges, the greater problems that they had. So,
and this, by the way, I didn't mean to cut you off. It's important because it's not only important in those large deals. Yes, it's required when you're in large deals because that's the value. But if you can't open, even for smaller companies, I think this is important because this isn't just a high class problem. Any company who's going to come to me in marketing, even with a couple $100 a year solution, what's the value that it's going to bring to me? Don't just tell me about how you can use AI to do something. What's the value that I get out of that? What is the return I'm going to get by either not having to hire another head or the greater efficiency I'm going to get with other tools that I have in my platform? Am I going to do a discovery as much in like a PLG-led solution? No, But me as a buyer, I'm more likely to evaluate you as a vendor if you can better articulate what you're going to bring to my business above and beyond just technical specifications.
So here's the next evolution of the question and the conversation that we're having right now. And that is that there was another McKinsey said, I'm quoting McKinsey a lot today, but they literally said, there's no one inside of the B2B company that owns the customer, that owns the voice of the customer, understanding the customer, articulating the needs of the customer to the rest of the company. It happens in silos and bits and pieces. And the voice of the customer comes through a sales lens when sales is talking to the customer, or it comes through a product success lens when it's coming through there, or it comes from a marketing lens, but that we need one leader. Now, their point of view was that it should be the chief marketing officer. So I wanted to just lay that out on the table and say, if it's this important to the level that you're talking about it here, then it should rise to the level of importance of somebody should be in charge of it, right?
I agree. As a marketing leader, I think it depends on the type of marketing leader that you have. As I said earlier, I come from a very product-centric background. And so my ability to speak to product in addition to sales is different than somebody who may be more of a brand leader, in which case that may not be the same person. It may need to come from sales or it may need to come from product, but I think misalignment is more common than we would like to admit. And I think that part of it is a lot of times companies will chase. And by chase, I mean, they'll go after something that may be misaligned for where their product is, and they'll start to build something because they have a whale on a hook. That may be a sales-led discussion. Oh, we got this customer and we can land this huge deal. Product can't really do what it does. Can we go and force something that's unnatural as a business? In which case we start to change the roadmap and start to build for a bigger fish, but that one bigger fish may not necessarily, the hook that we built may be too big for a lot of the smaller fish who is our hooks really within our wheelhouse of who wants to buy us. And so, yeah, I don't know that it needs to be a singular voice, but I think that there at least needs to be significant conversation between sales, product, marketing, and a consistent basis to bring in the voice of the customer to ensure that, we don't get too big for our britches, because I think that, especially for smaller companies, we want to shoot for the moon, and shooting for the moon doesn't always mean building for something that's outside of your parameters, because that could also be instant death for your business, because you've now over-architected something for a market that may have zero appetite for what you just built for the one customer who said, I want this.
So you brought up something that is a huge topic in what you just said. You brought up alignment between the different departments. And in this study of asking these 50 B2B C-suite executives, what are the greatest challenges to creating long-term sustainable growth? Internal alignment was by far the number one challenge. And what's interesting here is number one challenge was internal alignment. Number two challenge was lack of a deep understanding of the customer. The number three challenge was the balance between short and long term. And you talked about like a marketer that has a branding perspective versus a marketer that has a product perspective versus a CRO that has a quota over his or her head, right? So this idea of alignment, the prevailing thought has been from these C-suite executives is that the voice of the customer is the alignment factor, right? That is the most important, highest authority voice in the business. So I just wanted to throw that out and ask for your thoughts on this, because if misalignment is such a huge issue for us and challenge for us internally that we have to solve, what's the best way that we go about doing that? And does the customer voice have a big role in that?
I think where some companies get caught up is that it's not voice of the customer, it's voice of the customers. And I think that's where people get hung up, because in the scenario I gave earlier, where companies get sidelined and what they had is the roadmap because a singular customer who falls outside of what their target is shifts that roadmap, you've now actually gotten away from the voice of the customer. You've gotten away from the voice of the customers and you've gone to the voice of a customer, which is a big problem, because I hate aging myself like this. And when I talk out loud, it scares me sometimes. I feel like the old guy on the porch right now. But when we went back to like hardware versus the cloud, we used to have 3-year roadmaps, and we had to have 3-year roadmaps because hardware is difficult because you have to build out new form factors, and anytime you want to go and change a device, that's a long-term process. You said earlier, I used to work in the telecom space. When you wanted to go and functionally change the design of a handset, you had to have a 3-year roadmap. And because that 3-year roadmap, when you change the handset, then you have to change all the inner workings of the handset, get stuff fitted inside the new handset. DaaS, you can change your roadmap overnight, not literally, but you get my point, comparatively. And what I find is that 3-year roadmaps are now 1-year roadmaps. And part of that is necessary because things like AI and SaaS, whatever, have really collapsed the speed at which technology is impacting industries. And so having a 3-year roadmap is kind of a joke, because for me to say where this industry or any industry is going to be in 3 years with the pace of AI and how it's helping things work or not work in terms of development is a joke. If I have a 3-year roadmap and I say I'm going to stick to this for 3 years, I'm lying to you. It could be a year roadmap sometimes gets blown up in 6 months because of something else that's come up into the market today. But there's certainty in that 3-year roadmap in terms of staying true to who you are. The problem that we run into now is because we have the ability to build faster, more efficiently, whatever, we get influenced by these things that will cause companies to reach. And they reach because, there's a whale. This could change the trajectory of our business. And then you can't back out of that, because what happens is that if I had built a mid-market solution that has minimal implementation time and it's more out of the box, less customization, but now I had to go and build something for a Fortune 500 or a Fortune 100 or a Fortune 50 customer, the level of customization that customer is going to need, the amount of time it's going to take to implement into that environment with all the customization that needs to get done, I've now created a box that's so big that the mid-market solution that everyone else wants, they don't want something that's going to take 6 months to implement. I'm going to go to the next guy who can take my individual use case and implement it in 30 days at a cheaper price point.
Absolutely. And that goes back to AI, writing code, and what we can do on a dime now. Brian, we've talked about so much here, and our poor human brains can only retain about 2 or 3 things at a time. So what I want to do is I want to ask you as the last question is, if there were one takeaway where your peers in the C-suite are watching right now, what's the one thing that you want to make sure that everybody takes away from our conversation today?
I think the most important thing in today's environment, there's a lot of silo building, even amongst the C-suite. And some of that is because we all have our own set of KPIs that we need to go and hit. And sometimes we put on the blinders to get through our own KPIs and forget to talk to our peers about the things that we just spoke about. If we're not all in the same car, driving in the same direction, that's when things go awry. I've been at very large businesses which have structure and are less likely to deviate from a certain course. And recently, and in previous companies, I've been in more scale-ups. And that's where you'll find decisions going like this. It's not always stay the course, but it's if you're going to deviate off the course, make sure that you're all in the room together and talking about pros and cons and why this is the right thing for the business, not why this is the right thing for a customer, which may fundamentally transform your business. That's where things get hard to unarchitect. And so architecting things is not difficult. It's unwinding those things that have been architected where things get really messy. And so conversation between sales, marketing, product, finance, what's the implication of everything that we just discussed to our business model? How is this going to impact our, if all of a sudden we've significantly changed our product to move up market, what does that mean in terms of leads that need to be derived? What does that mean in terms of delivery of product and impact on cash coming in? These are all things that need to be discussed. It's not as easy as just to say, we want to go after this one opportunity. That one opportunity has so many downstream impacts. And that's where, we as leaders need to make sure that we've thought through all of the pros and cons and dotted all of our I's and crossed our T's before we go and make that decision.
I got to tell you, I love that you highlighted it as the number one thing, because it's the number one thing that is keeping us back. And what's important is that all of these challenges that we talked about, the top three, they're all internal. Internal alignment. Internally, are we doing what we need to do to understand the voice of the customer? Internally, balancing long-term versus short-term, right? These aren't things that we're looking at and saying, there is another company, there is another competitor, there is another COVID coming our way. These are things that are all within our control. That's the good news, I guess, from all of this. And here's what I do know what's going to happen is there's going to be people that have questions after listening to the conversation here. Is it appropriate we give out a link to your LinkedIn profile so people could reach out and talk to you?
Absolutely. And please feel free to connect with me there.
Fantastic. Well, I just have to say that the mission here of this podcast is to bring your voice and the voice of your peers in the C-suite together so we can learn. We all have different insights and different perspectives and different experiences. And if we could share with each other, that's the rising tide that lifts all boats. And I think you were an amazing part of that rising tide today, Brian. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.